Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the BAM! That's the Bylaws and Admin Manual Q&A panel discussion. If you're new to this, you haven't been joining us for the previous 5, you'll notice that there is an opportunity for some live chat interaction through the YouTube link here. Please utilize that to ask us any questions that you may have. As a group, we will be bringing forth any questions that we've heard within our parks or that have been posted on the message boards or that have been brought up to us throughout the course of the week. So we'll try to cover as many areas of questions as we are aware of, but please do feel free to utilize that live chat. We will be monitoring it and responding to those questions pretty much as soon as you post them. So this week, we are back on track to discuss sections 10 and 11 of the admin manual, which is dues and budget. And next week should be our last episode of BAM. And so we're sort of wrapping things up. Just a little bit of information on where we go from here. The idea, the concept at this point in time is that we will have specific areas that have been a little more highly debated up for review for the May All Things, so that we can make some decisions with input from the membership on which direction we should go. So we're getting some really good info here and making some great progress, which is all because of our active member involvement. So we're going to start out right away here with Admin Manual Section 10, which is dues. Let me bring that up. I should have already had that open. Scrolling, much scrolling. Section 9 is long. All right. Section 10, dues. Did anybody want to touch on any highlights of changes here before we get into any questions that were posted or people might have?
No.
So I think the biggest thing that we have in here is the first section is regular members shall pay dues the first week of February and August of each year. So that's a change from as we have it right now, where you can kind of pay dues whenever, and then you have 6 months from the time that you pay dues to the time that you become dues expired. We've run into some issues administratively where it's hard to tell whose dues paid and when your dues expire, when you have that nice rolling calendar. So I know quite a few people have run into that issue where they pay dues right before an election and then their dues expire right before the next election. And so they were going along being all happy and dues paid until the week before elections, and then they're not eligible to vote because you also can't pay your dues on the week of elections. So that's given some interesting and unique challenges, which we are hoping to completely avoid with this step forward.
One small personal question. One small question. If a member transfers parks, and would they be eligible to vote in their new parks, all things and everything, at that point, or were they going to have to wait the appropriate 6 months, even though they've already been previously dues paid?
So voting eligibility and dues are not the same thing in this draft of the documents. So they would remain dues paid because you're not dues paid to a park, you're dues paid to the entire organization. But in this document, under the definition of whether you're a regular member or associate member or whatever, the attendance requirement exists for both the local park and principality issues. So if somebody transfers from one park to another, they do have to hang out for a while before they're allowed to vote in the all things or elections. It's all the same.
Yeah, and that's actually currently how it works. So if your due is paid, there in the ORC, there's not a way to record that your dues paid in one park. It's just you enter your dues, and then it has an expiration time that's listed. So if, I mean, your dues paid and your dues paid, and your expiration doesn't change because you change parks. Like, that's just how it's administratively tracked in the ORC right now.
Okay. I think it's a brilliant plan to have them. This is, you can pay in January, and then we can track it easier. Being in administration, if you have somebody who pays in October, and then you have to keep track of that one person, and then like 3 more people pay in like December, and you've got 6 people that have paid in April, and trying to keep track of them is an administrative nightmare. So this is actually a really good plan.
This was done purely to benefit our administrators and subsequently our voting members by making everyone's dues expire at the same time, so that you only have to remember one dues expiration date. And this will make it more consistently easy for our people to participate in voting, which is important.
And we touched on this a little bit when we were discussing dues in relationship to the bylaws. So some of this we've already sort of hashed out. But I think this was the only area where there were questions for clarification. And I don't think that I had heard anyone strongly or even mildly opposed to this. Had anybody heard any comments or further questions regarding this section of the admin manual?
I just got a question in from Ravenstone about the dues paid. Will there be a pro-term option that you missed the payment date, but can you still become dues paid? It just will be retroactive, or, I mean, depending on attendance?
So we mentioned this was brought up before, and we answered the question before. It might have been on the forums, actually. But the answer to that question is no. Dues are the same no matter what. So if you pay your dues in January and they expire in February, you still pay the same amount. And the reasoning for that is the side effect becomes that what we essentially do is we incentivize paying your dues the week before the elections and then only getting charged $1. And then just being not dues paid the rest of the time, because why do you need to be dues paid if you can just pay right before the election? So in order to alleviate that and to not deal with the headache of trying to figure out whether dues are $1, $2, $3, $4, $5, whatever, depending on when you pay it. Dues are just dues. You pay a set fee to have a certain set of rights, and it just expires twice a year, and that's how that works.
Okay.
And really, the only time that impacts you is the very first time you pay dues.
Yeah. And people can still do the year's worth of payment in those certain dates, right? Okay. We just wanted to make sure that was all cool.
Yep, definitely. And I know a lot of people like to do that, where they just pay 2 semesters at a time, right? They pay $20 and then they don't have to worry about it for a whole nother year. And this doesn't preclude that. It just says that dues will be collected in the first week of January and the first week of, I'm not looking at it right now. Those 2 times will be collected.
And we actually just got a question from Kraken asking that, so that should have covered it, I believe.
Perfect.
Yeah. Also, how are we going to transition over to this system with our current dues paid members that are all paid in different weird months?
So ideally, people's dues would just expire on the dates that are set by the new corpora if we adopted this. And so some people may end up losing out on a couple of months of dues, but we only have to go through the pain of that one time ever, and we'll just have to go through it. Although the Council of Crowns in that situation could just as easily choose to refund the difference if they felt like it. That would totally be an executive situation, and they can handle it however they wanted to.
Right. So what I envision, because there's lots of areas in this current documentation that would require a transition phase. Like, we'll have to, if these documents are approved by the membership, then we'll have to have a transition plan of how do we make these changes, when do we make them, and do we decide as a group that it's just cold turkey, rip the Band-Aid off, or do we phase things in? And that's a definite topic of conversation that we'll have to discuss fairly rigorously once we know whether or not these documents will be approved. That's definitely one of the topics for sure. Anything involving money will need a good transition plan to make sure that it's fair and equitable to all people, which is super important. So then I think we've covered most of the dues questions. The next is section 11, which is the budget. This is actually a fairly short section, but it encompasses a lot of things. Now, part of this we've also already discussed when we were talking about the budgetary section of the bylaws. But would anybody want to touch on, either large questions that they've heard or changes? I mean, obviously we're looking at a different way of handling the budget altogether, right? We're managing it collectively so that it aligns with the fact that we are one organization and we need to have good financial controls for the entire organization.
And the budget will be submitted to Northreach. Northreach will do the budget approving after all kinds of craziness that we've had in Ravenstone, at least. That'll actually be a relief here.
Oh, totally. I mean, this really, it really relieves that burden on each individual park to reinvent the wheel, right? You don't always have people who are administratively minded or who have a lot of experience with putting together a budget or something like that, especially for newer parks who don't necessarily have those long-term members who have been doing this term after term after term. It can be really difficult. How do we put together a budget that's responsible and that meets all the needs of our membership and make sure we can pay our bills, and how do we track all that? So this is definitely helpful for parks that are still establishing themselves. It gives them a lot of support. But the biggest thing, one of the big things anyhow, if you look at the first section of section 11, is sort of the process of how this will work. So the idea is that the Council of Crowns will draft the budget and then presents it to the membership for approval in February. And then the membership has to approve it by a 2/3 vote. So in no situation is this the Council of Crowns deciding on a budget that they want and then just making it happen. It has to go to the All Thing, and the All Thing has to approve it with a pretty good majority. So it needs to be a fair and balanced budget, or else it's not going to pass.
So, and for those of you guys watching at home, to contrast that, the current process, according to our corpora, is that there isn't one at all. No budget is required by our corpora currently. We have been using a budgetary process voluntarily by the Council of Crowns for the last, a couple of years now, and it works really, really well. But the current process is that your monarch and prime minister can spend up to a combined 20% of the money without anyone's permission. And if they want to spend more than that in a given month, they have to request the money from the All Thing. But essentially, if you had $1,000 in the bank, then they could spend $200 the first month, $180 the next month, etc., and through their terms without saying anything. And that's how the money's handled currently. That puts us in a position that we cannot carry forward when we're dealing with the funds that we want to procure through charitable gaming and charitable donations, where that money has to be more tightly controlled than one individual's whim, where you might have a situation where they're just using it to fill their gas tank or something, which could get us in a lot of trouble.
So did anybody have specific questions that they had heard in parks or that had been addressed to them that they wanted to touch base on?
My park's been pretty quiet on the budget. I mean, there's been questions about how it would work, but everyone seems to understand that if we want to start getting money from other organizations and that those sums of money are going to climb into 4 or 5 figures, that we need a controlled process for handling that money. And so I haven't heard a lot of questions about it, really.
I haven't heard any questions come out of Ravenstone about it either. It's pretty cut and dry, and everybody pretty much understands that the process needs to change, because when you're handling larger sums of money, there needs to be a better control process for it.
Yeah, been looking through the questions that have been posted on the forums. It was pretty limited, mostly clarifications on, this is the wording, what was the intention here. I didn't see any real challenges to, what the intentions are. So I think that this seems like something we're all pretty in agreement on, which is nice. So I may have super misjudged the number of things that we were going to be able to make progress on tonight, because as of right now, those were the only 2 things that I had on the agenda. So how do you guys feel about pushing through the last few sections of or articles of the bylaws and sections of the admin manual and calling this complete for our BAM sessions?
I'd be for it.
I will miss you terribly.
We do have another question come in the chat really quickly. It's not necessarily related to. Oh.
Yeah, I just asked for clarification on it.
Okay, well then I will let you continue to do that, and when we get more.
I feel like we covered this discussion like during the last during one of our last couple of meetings.
Yeah, so in the previous meeting that we had, we covered Article 8 of the bylaws, which is financial matters, and that pretty much covers most of what we are covering in the administrative manual, those 2 sections. So most of this we've kind of already hashed out. So what we would be looking at as additional areas to cover would be Article 9 and 10 of the bylaws, which is indemnification and amendment to the bylaws. And then the admin manual has Section 9, which is crown quals, Section 15, which is testing, Section 16, which is copyrights, and Section 17, which is adherence to law. So we may not be able to get through all of those, but I think we could make some good headway into those. Do we have clarification on the chat question yet?
No, I'm assuming, and I'm just going to go out on a limb, but that the question is whether or not somebody can donate money directly to a local park, and we covered that in the other meeting. The short answer is yes, they can, as long as they make the donation with instructions in writing. Otherwise, they can donate it to the organization in general.
Right, exactly.
So and Robert, let me know if that didn't answer your question.
So I think let's move over to the bylaws and look at Article 9, which is indemnification. And this is something that we don't currently have in our corpora. And it's a pretty good, definitely something we'll want to include in our legal documents, very important. And I think it might be one of those sections that's actually required for the 501c3 application. There's a list of things that need to be included in your bylaws. One of them is a dissolution clause, and I believe that the indemnification is also required, but I would need to double check that. So one question that had come up through the forums was, basically this is like a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo stuff, right? If this section had been reviewed by an attorney, and at this point in time, it has not been reviewed by an attorney or by any type of legal counsel. And there is definitely the intention that before any of these documents were submitted, that we would have them reviewed by someone. Not sure who that would be or the process of how we go about that, but before we file any new documents, we should definitely have them verified and looked at by a qualified person. That is still open to discussion of how we go about identifying that person and then paying for that.
So to interject real quick for Article 9, a couple of things. One, the language that is in Article 9 was almost directly pulled from a combination of 3 different recognized 501c3 chapters that took in the kind of donations that we're seeking to take in. So, and what this does for people that want the too long didn't read summary for this is basically what this says is anybody that is responsible for the organization, that acts in good faith and within reason, can't be sued by the organization, essentially. So if I, as an officer of the organization, do my job to the best of my ability and something horrible happens, the organization itself is not allowed to come after me for damages because I acted within reason and to the best of my ability. However, if I were to do something totally horrible, like, I don't know, bring a gun to the field and that gun went off and shot somebody, this would not protect me from the organization suing me because I did not act within reason. So that's really what this whole section is about. It's to protect the people that are acting in good faith on our behalf.
I do remember now this was one of the sections that was suggested to be included specifically when we were looking at the directors and officers insurance, because not having an indemnification section included in your legal documents made it very difficult if you were ever to make a claim with your directors and officers insurance. And so this was another sort of best practice inclusion. Something else that just came to mind as I was looking through this is that a great resource for us to be able to get inexpensive but very reliable review of our documents would be the Foraker Group, which I've worked with them before with other nonprofit organizations here in the state of Alaska. And they are a great resource for nonprofit organizations specifically for things like this. And they offer some reasonable legal counsel from people who look at nonprofit organization legality issues as their job. So that would be an option for us when we get to that point, is to contact the Foraker Group and work with them. Had anybody else had any questions regarding indemnification? I'm not sure that I had really heard anything out there.
Nope, not really.
It's a pretty quick one. Very important, but pretty quick is that, like, we should have it, and I think most people agree with that. We need to make sure that what we have is appropriate and complete, but I don't think there's any questions of whether or not it should be included. So that brings us to Article 10, which is the last article of the bylaws, and that is amendments to these bylaws. It pretty much goes down and says we can't change the bylaws without membership approval. So that's a good thing, which means that you can't have a board of directors that comes in and just makes a bunch of decisions and then says, well, whether you like it or not, these are the rules by which we're governed. It has to go back to your membership for ratification. And that's by a 2/3 majority. So again, it's not just a simple majority. It's a pretty substantial majority. Your membership has to be on board with it. They have to be changes that are supported by the entire organization. I don't think I had heard any questions about this.
Nope. No.
So that's super exciting because that means we have now completed the review of our first document. The bylaws have been discussed from start to end. They are available for review by anyone inside or outside of our membership of what the plans are and intentions and discussions are. So yay, I'm very excited by this. Then that brings us back to the admin manual. And what do we have in the admin manual? We had crown quals, testing, copyrights, and adherence to law. So I guess let's just start right in with crown quals, huh? It's a very large section, one that we refer to on a very regular and routine basis, and one that we get a lot of questions about, right? Because a lot of people participate in crown quals, and so this is an area of the admin manual that will be very regularly used. Does anybody want to give us a quick highlight over the changes that went into this? Oh, somebody's got a question.
Yep. So there's a question from Robert about whether or not there's a way for issues in the bylaws to be approached that must be maybe with the time crunch, and does the board have the option to act executively if absolutely needed? I believe the answer to that is no, because anytime we make a change to the bylaws, it is a legal document that has to be submitted to the IRS and so on and so forth. So there's no pencil whipping changes in that.
That being said, the Council of Crowns, the board does have the ability in the current draft to make changes to the administrative manual, which is the processes by which we do all of our internal functions, with a unanimous vote of that board of directors. Otherwise, it would require a vote of the membership to make that change. So if there was some sort of executive expediency needed, then in this current draft, the board of directors has the ability to do that, as so long as they get 100% unanimous vote.
And also, so long as that whatever change received that unanimous approval from the board doesn't conflict with any instructions that are in the bylaws, because the admin manual can't override the bylaws. So
we can make modifications to the administration manual, but not the bylaws.
That's correct. With the 100% unanimous vote of the board of directors. So.
So with the Article 9, and Robert, if you have follow-up questions on that, feel free to post them, and we may interrupt what we're talking about and get those answered. But for Crown Quals, this is actually a pretty easy section because there was like only 2 changes and they were super minor. One is that there were 2 categories added. Where were they at?
I think they were in garbing? No. I thought they were in garbing.
I believe I see one. There was one under literature.
We added the publication category for things like flyers, newsletters, advertisements, etc., because that didn't neatly fall into any other literature category, and then usually they would get entered in a rows, which is lame. So we added a category for those items. Another change in here is under scoring. I believe that we called. There's the line in here that cleared up an issue that we had a year and a half or so ago. So the corpora specifies that the overall champion score will be rounded to the second decimal place or the hundredths. And those are pretty much the only changes in this section. I take that back. There was also was removed from cooking the exemption from being Amped Guard, period, or fantasy related. When we were drafting this, the committee thought that was sort of silly because it's pretty darn easy to make a cooking entry that fits into the incredibly broad theme of Amped Guard. We figured if every other category had to go through that, including photography, then surely somebody can make a cake in the shape of a dragon rather than making a cake in the shape of the Empire State Building. I don't know, whatever. So those are pretty much the only changes. Other than that, it's exactly the same as what we do now.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that I saw any conversation regarding this section at all. Did you guys hear anything in the parks about this?
Nope. Again, from Ravenstone, it was pretty cut and dry, and the addition to those specific items was actually well needed. So it's all good from here.
Yeah, Luke Moon, same place.
I haven't heard anything at Frozen Coast.
Cool. Okay. So that would put us on to section 15, which was testing. There it is. Okay, and I don't think we had any major changes in here. Had anybody heard any questions? I know Will had posted some things on the forums, and I'm pulling that up right now, but I believe most of that was just clarifications, and I don't think that there was any issue with the actual content.
I think you're correct.
Oh, we did add a time limit. And so there was some discussion about how much of a time limit was appropriate and why that time limit was added. And the biggest thing was that, you know, our GMRs are volunteers, and it's not necessarily fair to make them sit around for 2 hours while somebody takes a test. If it's taking them 2 hours, they'll probably need to do some more studying. All right, next was section 16, which is copyrights. This is new. We have not had a copyright section before.
Yeah, this was added. One of the members of the committee pointed out that it might not be a bad idea to have a document somewhere saying, hey, we own these, so that somebody else doesn't just come along and use them. Or at least something that shows that, hey, we assert some level of ownership to this. Even if we're not writing cease and desist letters everywhere in the world, at least we've got something written and that we've agreed that these are ours, sort of a thing.
Yeah, it's we put our blood, sweat, and tears into this. Please don't take it.
One interesting thing that I did have someone mention to me, just sort of in passing, was that they found it was interesting that the copyright section was in the administrative manual as opposed to the bylaws. Since the bylaws is the legal document that we would file. And the reason for that is that it's very difficult to update our bylaws, right? Like that takes the entire organization to, you know, review everything, and it costs money to update our bylaws. We have to refile it with the state. Whereas the administrative manual, if we add a new park, that would be a perfect example of when the board of directors would unanimously approve to update the administrative manual. Like, you know, if we add another park, we don't necessarily need to bring that to the membership to say, hey, do you guys agree that we should, you know, hold copyright over this new park's name? That's something that is very administrative in nature and is sort of assumed when a new park comes on board. And so we could take care of that in the administrative manual very efficiently without having that long, drawn-out process.
Also, would like to interject. Every time we bring up the draft where the draft rules where the board of directors can change the administrative manual with 100% vote, I like to also make sure that people are aware of the fact that the populace with a 20% petition can put anything on the all thing and vote to do whatever they want with the organization, which includes changing it back if they don't like the decision, or firing all of the board of directors if they don't like what they're doing. So there's always recourse to that 100% vote thing.
Yep, and none of that is ever on the table for discussion, right? Like the membership has total ultimate control in the end. If they don't like what leadership is doing, you can totally change that. So section 17 is adherence to law. Pretty much says we're required to obey the law. And that the organization does not condone or tolerate any illegal activity or physical violence to any person. Those are sort of assumed, but here they're very clearly spelled out. The organization not on board with any illegal activity, and if you are a member, you should obey the law. I don't think I heard any complaints about that whatsoever. So that takes us clear on through to the end of the admin manual. So things that I actually didn't include on the agenda for what we were going to cover was contents of the different appendices. And the reason for that was that wasn't necessarily covered as part of the Corpora Review Committee's charter. They were taking care of the content of the documents, not necessarily the appendices. So while there are there's some draft sort of language in here for both Children in AmpGuard and Member Code of Conduct, those are already existing. It's already existing language that came from outside of us, outside of Northreach. The Children in AmpGuard was voted on by Circle of Monarchs, and I think I think there used to be a date in here. Well, anyhow, it was voted on by Circle of Monarchs, which is AmpGuard wide, so not a lot of changes there for us. And then same thing with the Member Code of Conduct. That's an AmpGuard wide kind of thing, so I don't anticipate that we'd have any massive changes to that wording either. Then other appendices that are in here that are not currently displayed in our draft is the waiver. We have the waiver, of course, and so that's an easy one. And then the next one is the membership application, which we've had quite a bit of discussion about. What would this contain? What sort of information will we be asking people to give us? And so that's something that still does need to be drafted up. And I think that now that we've made it through our round of discussion on these documents, that the membership application is definitely on the docket to be completed so that we can have a draft of, and when we do our final voting on this, that it can include all of the contents of the appendices. The other one is the oath of office, where we would put the official oath of office, depending upon what happens with that vote, because I feel that's one of the topics that will probably come to Althing in May. So it is 8:41. We have made it through all of this documentational goodness. And I don't know, does anybody have any sort of parting questions or overall wrap up on this that they wanted to comment on before I talk some more?
Nope, got no apples for me.
Everybody's so quiet. So I kind of talked a little bit at the beginning of this episode of sort of like what the next steps are. And so now that we've made it through this, we've gotten quite a bit of very good membership feedback from the membership. Now it's time to incorporate that into a second draft. And one of the things that we'll be doing is identifying those areas that were a little bit more contentious, and we'll be bringing those forward to the Althing to find out, okay, so this is what we heard, but what does the membership really want for these areas? And that will help us refine and direct the next draft so that we're including the correct sort of vision for what the membership is looking for. We'll also need to draft the membership application so that we can sort of have a go at that and see what type of information, what that would look like in existence. And then I think we should have a solid second draft coming out, and we can see if there's more things that we need to improve on it. But I mean, my feeling overall is that a lot of the topics that have required discussion, some of them have been, I think, very well resolved. Some of them are still up in the air, and we need to do some further. We need to bring that to the Althing and get membership feedback on that and a final sort of approval of which direction we want to go. But overall, I feel like we're making some really good progress on this and definitely headed in the right direction. So I guess what that means is that we're not doing this next Sunday because we made it through. So I wanted to thank everybody who has participated, who has, devoted their Sunday evenings to this project. I super, super appreciate it. We definitely wouldn't be to this point if it weren't for everyone's involvement. I want to thank everybody who's logged in and asked really good questions that have helped us to, consider some of the topics and make sure that we're moving in the right direction of what membership is looking for and what membership supports, as well as meets the needs of the future direction of the organization. And I want to thank everybody for, hanging in there and being involved and making this process work for us as an organization. Super important and appreciated. So with that, I think we call it the end of this episode and the end of BAM as we know it. Thank you very much. Everybody have a great evening.